The morning my nephew handed me a document and told me to sign it, he was smiling. Not the smile of someone who loves you, the smile of someone who already thinks they've won. I remember standing in the kitchen of the house I built with my own hands, the house where I raised my son, where my wife spent her last Christmas, where I still keep her reading glasses on the nightstand because I can't bring myself to move them. My nephew Marcus was standing across from me in a suit that cost more than my first car, and he was smiling like I was already gone. I didn't sign anything that morning, but I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Raymond. I'm 67 years old. I spent 41 years building a manufacturing business from a single machine in a rented garage in Columbus, Ohio. I am not a dramatic man. I don't raise my voice. I don't make threats. I learned a long time ago that quiet men with patience outlast loud men with ambition every single time. I want to tell you what happened over the last 14 months, because I think some of you will recognize pieces of it. Maybe in your own family, maybe in your own home. And I want you to know, if you're sitting in a chair right now, feeling like the walls are closing in, feeling like the people you trusted are turning into strangers, I want you to know it doesn't end the way they plan it. It ends the way you decide. My wife Carol passed away 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I tell people it was peaceful, but that's the thing you say because the truth is harder to explain to someone who wasn't there. We were married 38 years. We had one son, Daniel, who lives in Portland now with his family. Good man, works hard, calls me every Sunday without fail. After Carol died, I kept working for about 2 years. Then I handed the day-to-day operations of the business to my management team and stepped back. Not retired. I still owned everything. Still reviewed the numbers every week, but I stopped going in every day. I started taking long drives. I read more books than I had in 30 years. I visited Daniel twice a year. I was, for the first time in my adult life, genuinely still. That's when my nephew Marcus started calling more often. Marcus is my younger brother's son. My brother Gerald and I were never especially close. He made different choices than I did, some of which I won't get into here, but Marcus had always been around the edges of the family. Holiday dinners, the occasional phone call. He knew what I had built because Gerald had made sure Marcus knew. That much I understood later. When Marcus started calling, it felt natural at first. He was attentive. He asked about Carol. He drove up from Cincinnati one weekend, and we had a long dinner, and he told me how much he'd always admired what I built and how hard I'd worked. He brought his girlfriend Tanya, who was warm and funny, and asked me thoughtful questions about the early days of the business. I liked her. I liked both of them. I should tell you something about myself that matters here. After Carol died, the loneliness was something I hadn't prepared for. Not the absence of noise. I'd always been comfortable in silence, but the specific loneliness of not having the person who knew your whole story. Daniel was wonderful, but he had his own life. My friends were mostly other men in their 60s who dealt with loss the same way we'd been taught by not talking about it. So when Marcus started showing up with warm energy and genuine seeming interest, I let my guard down in a way I probably wouldn't have 5 years earlier. That's the honest truth. And I think it's important to say it. By last spring, Marcus was coming up to Columbus almost every other weekend. He'd help me with things around the house, some repairs I'd been putting off, yard work, that kind of thing. He started meeting my neighbors. He introduced himself to my attorney once when he happened to stop by during a meeting. Casual. Nothing that seemed like anything. He started bringing up the business carefully, in pieces. How was the company doing? What did the management team look like? Had I thought about the long-term plan? Just questions at first. The kind you might ask an uncle you're genuinely curious about. Then, slowly, the questions started having edges. Had I updated my estate documents since Carol died? Had I thought about whether the management team could really run things without me? Wasn't it a lot to carry alone? Didn't I worry about what would happen if my health changed suddenly the way Carol's had? That last one landed differently than he knew. I want to be precise about what Marcus was doing, because I don't think he was stupid. I think he was patient and deliberate, and had spent considerable time thinking this through. He was building a case, over months, that I was isolated, that the business was at risk, and that someone needed to step in and help manage things for my own protection. He was laying groundwork. I just didn't see the full picture yet. The document he handed me that Tuesday morning in March was a limited power of attorney, drafted by an attorney in Cincinnati I'd never heard of, that would have given Marcus authority over business decisions in the event that I was, and I'm reading from memory here, unable or unwilling to execute sound financial judgment due to health, emotional distress, or cognitive decline. Unable or unwilling. Those two words. I read the document twice at the kitchen table while Marcus stood across from me with that smile. Then I set it down and I asked him, very quietly, who told him to have this prepared. He said he'd done it on his own because he cared about me. He said he'd talked to Gerald about it and they both agreed I needed protection. He said Daniel was too far away to be involved, and the business needed continuity, and he was family, and this was what family did. I nodded slowly. I told him I'd have my attorney look at it. He said he hoped I wouldn't make this more complicated than it needed to be. That sentence, that specific sentence, I have thought about it many times since, because it told me everything I needed to know about how he saw me as a complication to be managed, not a person to be considered. And it told me something about how long he'd been thinking about this, that he was already frustrated with potential resistance before I'd even said no. I walked him to the door and told him I'd be in touch. He was still smiling, but the quality of it had changed. He drove away, and I stood at the window watching his car until I couldn't see it anymore. Then I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia who has handled my affairs for 22 years and who knew Carol and who does not waste words. I told her what happened. I read her the relevant language from the document. There was a pause. Then she said, "Raymond, I need you to tell me everything that has happened in the last year. Every conversation, every visit, everything." I talked for nearly 2 hours. When I finished, Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she told me what she thought was happening. Not what she could prove, yet what she believed, professionally and personally. She said Marcus had been positioning himself methodically. The POA was an opening move, not the whole strategy. She said the language about unwilling to execute sound financial judgment was particularly aggressive because it didn't require any medical finding. It was subjective enough that someone could argue it in court based purely on testimony. She said she needed to make some calls. I hung up and I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The house was very quiet. I looked at Carol's reading glasses on the counter where I'd left them that morning. I thought about what she would say if she were sitting across from me. I knew what she would say. She would say, "Raymond, you built everything you have from nothing. You did it quietly, and you did it honestly, and you don't owe anyone an explanation for any of it. Do what needs to be done." So that's what I did. What I did not do was confront Marcus or tip him off in any way. I didn't change my behavior around him, didn't stop returning his calls, didn't let anything shift in my tone. This was the hardest part, not because I'm a good actor, but because I was genuinely angry and I had to keep that somewhere it wouldn't show. I've always been good at that. Not everyone is. Over the following 6 weeks, Patricia uncovered several things that made the picture considerably clearer. Marcus had spoken to 2 of my company's mid-level managers on separate occasions, informal conversations, positioned as general family concern in which he had asked about operational vulnerabilities and my level of day-to-day involvement. One of the managers, to his credit, mentioned it to the CFO, who mentioned it to Patricia after she started making inquiries. Marcus had also had 2 meetings with a business broker in Columbus, not Patricia's contact, a different firm, where he had made preliminary inquiries about the valuation process for a manufacturing company of my size. He had not identified himself as having any ownership interest. He had described himself as advising a family member. And Gerald, my brother Gerald, who I had not spoken to in nearly 3 years, had apparently been in contact with an estate litigation attorney in Columbus about what options existed for challenging a will or trust on grounds of diminished capacity. Diminished capacity. I want you to sit with that phrase for a moment. I had a medical checkup 8 weeks before all of this started. My doctor, who I've seen for 15 years, told me my blood work was better than men 20 years younger. My mind is sharp. I sleep well. I drive myself everywhere. I manage my own finances. I do the crossword every morning, and I'm usually finished before my coffee is. But diminished capacity doesn't have to be true to be alleged. Patricia explained this to me carefully, and I listened carefully because I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I was dealing with a coordinated effort, across at least 3 people, to establish a legal and financial framework that would allow them to take control of my assets, either by consent to the POA I didn't sign, or by legal action, the capacity challenge. Gerald was researching. The business valuation inquiry suggested they weren't planning to keep the company running. They were planning to liquidate. My company employs 212 people. I want to say that number out loud. 212 people who come to work every morning and collect a paycheck and have health insurance and mortgages and kids in school. I thought about all of them while Patricia explained what Marcus and Gerald were doing. The anger I felt was very cold and very focused. I think that's the only useful kind. Patricia and I spent the next several weeks building what she called a fortress. I will share the relevant details because some of you may need to understand how this works. First, I had a comprehensive cognitive assessment done by a neurologist, not because I had any doubt about my own mind, but because I wanted documented, clinical, unambiguous evidence on file that would make a capacity challenge die before it got started. The neurologist told me I performed in the top percentile for my age group. Patricia filed that assessment with my estate documents the same day. Second, I restructured the business. I formalized the management team's authority in writing, with clear delineation of operational responsibilities. I established a board of advisors, 3 experienced people who knew the industry with specific oversight functions. This accomplished 2 things. It insulated the company from any argument that it was vulnerable without me, and it created a paper trail showing deliberate, sophisticated, forward-thinking governance, the opposite of diminished capacity. Third, and this is the part that took the most thought, I updated my estate planning documents completely. My existing will was 11 years old, written when Carol was still alive. Patricia and I spent 3 sessions rebuilding it from the ground up, not in reaction to Marcus and Gerald, but in reflection of what I actually wanted and had always wanted. Daniel will be taken care of. Certain employees who built this company with me will be recognized in ways they don't know yet. There are causes Carol cared about that will receive meaningful support. Marcus and Gerald received nothing. Not out of anger, out of clarity. You don't leave anything to people who looked at your life and saw an opportunity. Fourth, and Patricia suggested this one specifically, I began keeping a written record. Dates, times, the content of every conversation with Marcus, every text message, saved and documented. Every visit, written up the evening it happened. 37 separate entries over 4 months. Patricia said if this ever went to court, that journal would be the most important document we had. During all of this, Marcus continued to visit. I continued to be cordial. He brought up the POA twice more. Both times I told him I was still reviewing it with my attorney. He seemed to accept this. Once he mentioned that Daniel should probably be more involved in planning, which was interesting because Daniel and Marcus had never been close, and I suspected Marcus was testing whether I'd put Daniel in contact with him. I didn't. I told Daniel everything directly, in a long phone call on a Sunday evening, and Daniel said the words a father needs to hear, which were, "Dad, tell me what you need, and I'll be there." I told Daniel to stay in Portland for now. I had it handled. In late June, something shifted in Marcus's approach. The visits became slightly less frequent. He started asking more specific questions about the business timeline. What did I see for the company in the next 5 years? Had I thought about selling? Was the market good right now for manufacturing acquisitions? More direct than before. I think the slower pace of the POA response was making him anxious. Then in July, I got a call from Gerald. Gerald and I had not spoken since our mother's estate was settled, which ended badly, which is another story. His voice was the same as I remembered it, smooth and unhurried, the way our father taught us both to talk to people we needed something from. He said he'd been thinking about me. He said he hoped there were no hard feelings about the old business with Mom's estate. He said he thought it would be good for the family to reconnect and maybe I should come down to Cincinnati for a weekend. I was polite. I was warm. I told him I'd check my calendar. I called Patricia immediately after. and told her Gerald had made contact. She said, "Now it's moving. Be ready." 2 weeks later, Marcus arrived without calling ahead, which he'd never done before. He said he was in the neighborhood, which wasn't possible, because I don't live near anything Marcus would have reason to be near. He came in, had coffee, and then put a folder on the table in front of me. Inside the folder were 2 documents. The first was a revised POA, the same general structure as the first one, but with some language softened. The second was a proposal for Marcus to join the company as strategic advisor to the owner, with a salary and an equity stake that, over a vesting period, would have given him 15% of the business. He told me he'd been talking to some people in the industry and he thought fresh perspective at the ownership level was what the company needed. He said he wasn't trying to take anything from me, he was trying to help me build something that would last. I looked at both documents. I looked at him. Then I asked him a question I had been saving for the right moment. I asked him what he and the broker in Columbus had discussed back in March, and I used the broker's name. The smile left his face. I told him I knew about Gerald's conversations with the litigation attorney. I told him I had every text he'd ever sent me printed and organized by date. I told him I had a neurologist's report, a fully updated estate plan, a board of advisors, and a very patient attorney who had been building a file for 4 months. I told him the folder he'd put on the table was going to leave with him. I told him I was not angry. I meant it. I told him that if he or Gerald pursued any legal action, any action at all, Patricia would be filing suit for tortious interference with business relationships and elder financial exploitation, both of which carry significant exposure. I told him I had more than enough documentation to make both claims uncomfortable for everyone involved. Then I told him to go home. Marcus stood up slowly. He looked older than when he'd walked in 40 minutes earlier. He picked up the folder. He said something, I don't remember exactly what. Something about how he was only trying to help, and I didn't respond. I walked to the front door and opened it and waited. He left. I stood at the window again. Different feeling than 4 months before. Not relief, exactly. More like the particular satisfaction of a thing done correctly. I called Patricia. I called Daniel. Then I made dinner, sat at the kitchen table where Carol and I had eaten 10,000 meals, and I ate quietly and felt, for the first time in months, completely like myself. I want to tell you what happened after, because I think that part matters too. Gerald did contact an attorney, not the litigation firm, a different one about whether a capacity challenge had any merit. Patricia's letter arrived on that attorney's desk before any filing was made. The attorney, who was apparently a reasonable person, called Patricia directly. That conversation ended whatever Gerald had been planning. Marcus called me once, about 3 weeks after I asked him to leave. He didn't mention any of what had happened. He said he hoped things were okay, and he'd like to stay in touch if I was open to it. I said I wished him well. That was the end of the conversation, and likely the end of that relationship, and I carry no grief about it. My brother Gerald has not contacted me since July. That's a different kind of grief, not for what we had, but for what we never managed to build. Gerald and I grew up in the same house and became very different people, and I made peace with that a long time ago, but this was a kind of betrayal that goes in its own category. You don't plot against your brother and then get to call yourself family. That's not how it works. The company is doing well. The management team has been excellent. 212 people are going to work every morning, and none of them know how close things came to looking very different. And that's exactly as it should be. Daniel and his family came for Thanksgiving. His kids, my grandchildren, 8 and 11 years old, ran through the house the way kids do and filled up all the silence. We had too much food and not enough chairs, and his youngest fell asleep on the couch before dessert. I sat at the table after everyone else had gone to bed and thought about Carol, the way I do. I thought she would have been loud and warm and absolutely in charge of that kitchen, and I would have been grateful, as I always was, to be in the room with her. I moved her reading glasses to the windowsill in the bedroom. Still there, but somewhere with light. There are things I want to say to anyone watching who's in something like this situation, because I read the comments on these kinds of stories, and I know some of you are living pieces of what I just described. The first thing I want to say is that the people doing this to you are often banking on something specific, not your weakness, but your unwillingness to believe it's really happening. Because you love them, or you used to, and the mind protects itself by explaining things away. That delay is the thing they're counting on. Don't give it to them. The second thing is that documentation is not paranoia. Writing things down, saving messages, noting dates and times, that is not the behavior of a suspicious or bitter person. That is the behavior of someone who understands that memory is fallible, and courts require evidence. Start the journal before you need it. The third thing, and this is the one I want to say most directly, is that the most powerful thing I did throughout all of this was nothing that looked like power. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't confront. I didn't send angry messages at midnight. I kept my face neutral and my actions deliberate, and I built something quietly while they thought I was doing nothing. That patience wasn't a performance. It came from a very specific place. I knew what I had built. I knew what was mine. I knew who I was. And when you know those things, really know them. Not just tell yourself there's no amount of maneuvering by someone else that can make you feel small. They were operating in the space between what they thought I was and what I actually was. I just had to make sure the distance between those two things stayed large enough for them to fall into. Marcus thought he was watching a tired old man sitting alone in a big house, gradually losing his grip. He was watching a man who had built a company from nothing, buried his wife with his dignity intact, and had 41 years of practice at doing hard things quietly. There's a difference. And eventually, everyone in this story found out what it was. I still take long drives. I still read every morning. I still talk to Daniel on Sundays. I'm working with Patricia on a foundation in Carol's name, something connected to the hospice program that helped us at the end, because I know firsthand what good care in those last weeks means to a family, and I want other people to have it. I'm not telling this story for sympathy, and I'm not telling it for applause. I'm telling it because somebody watching this is sitting across from a document they haven't signed yet, or a phone call they keep turning over in their mind, or a family member with a smile that doesn't reach their eyes. Don't mistake stillness for weakness. Don't mistake quiet for confusion. Don't assume that because someone hasn't reacted, they haven't understood. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is see everything clearly, say very little, and let the work speak when the moment comes. My name is Raymond. I'm 67 years old. I built something. I kept it, and I'm still here.